This is Platform Diaries with Shane Williams, who chews the fat with entrepreneurs, startup founders and thought leaders on what it takes to traverse the wall between startup and scale-up.
They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I'm not entirely convinced. I reckon once you get to that point where your business is scaling, leadership can absolutely pivot and think about how to restructure for the future. I'm your host, Shane Williams. My guest today is Chris Venter, CTO at REA Group. Chris is an avid cyclist. He's also a non-executive director at Group, on the board of advisors for the Melbourne University, and spent a number of years reimagining banking at ANZ. I trust you'll enjoy the interview. So Chris, thanks for joining me on Platform Diaries.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Shane. Thanks for having me here today.
So I'm just going to jump in and hit you with a heavy question straight up, but I hope you're ready for this one. But what do you think growing pains looks like in a maturing digital business?
Okay, well, that is a good one to start with. I think almost all maturing digital businesses, that start out small, face similar issues. And whether they start out in a garage with one person or 7 or 10, that's kind of what I mean by small. And in the beginning, it's all about speed, right? It's get your product to market quickly. The teams are very small. Everyone is focused on the same goal. Communication is easy. It's clear. There's only a small number of people. So everyone knows what everyone else is doing. And so it's relatively simple to keep everyone aligned, to keep focus and to, get product out the door. And that's where, most small digital organizations start. I think you can keep that up to a point, and eventually you get to a scale and a size where you start to have difficulties. And where is that point? I don't know. I think it's different for every organization. Some probably reach that point sooner than others. There's some interesting science actually behind that. So there's a magic number called Dunbar's number, and obviously someone with the surname of Dunbar came up with it. But, it suggests that there's kind of a cognitive limit to the number of people who can maintain what they call these sort of stable social relationships. And there's some science that backs behind this. But ultimately, this basically says when a team gets bigger than about 150, it gets very difficult to maintain, connective tissue between the teams, to communicate, to keep everyone aligned. It just gets extremely difficult because there's so many communication lines and signals that need to happen. And I think this is what starts to happen in many digital organizations. As they mature, they grow and they get bigger than that number. And when they start to get to that point, there's still this focus on speed. And I think that's important because obviously, you're trying to get product out the door. You've got investors, you've got shareholders, you've got people who want to see outcomes. But what starts to happen at that point, I think, is you then start to see cracks start to form. And those cracks start forming in A, communication, B, you start to get tech sprawl and tech debt because teams are not communicating effectively. And I think when teams stop communicating effectively, the symptoms of that are things where you're redoing this, you're solving the same problems over and over, in different teams. You get silos where you have data quality challenges within those particular silos. You have lack of visibility amongst each other about common problems. And you just can't stay on top of what everyone's doing at that point in time. And so, I think these are definitely some of the symptoms a lot of organizations will see. And many of them grow up as being very product focused too, which is the right thing to do at that point in time as well. And I think that product focused view means teams start to get structured into business lines that almost mimic those products. And that is great, again, in terms of getting the product out the door and speed. But when you start to scale and you start to see that sort of tech debt being built up, you've started to think about, are there different ways we should be organized, or could be, that could still deliver great product to market, but not necessarily, have the inefficiencies that can creep in if you're not careful how you're organized. So, that's probably some of my thinking about that question.
Sounds almost like if we've got communications challenges as the teams grow, then it's probably important to be deliberate and I guess methodical about ways of working. But why do you think that's so important?
Yeah, I think it comes back to some of the problems. If you're not careful, I think you'll just find yourself in that position without actually planning it. And so I guess in a way you could describe it as, if you're not careful, there's this wonderful thing called Conways Law. And if you're not careful, Conway's Law will play out in your organization. And what Conway's Law is actually, it's an IT theory created by a computer science program. His name was Melvin Conway. And he states that, organizations that design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the organization communication structures. And ultimately, what that boils down to is, if you don't plan how things are organized, then the way your organization is structured and organized, your IT systems will start to reflect that. And so if you're not deliberate, that's what's going to happen. And you can see this in so many organizations today. Think about the last time you called a telecommunications company. I'm not going to mention names. Or you called a big bank. Think of how many times you were handed off to different people and different departments to solve your problem as a customer, right? And when you see that, you can almost guarantee that Conway's Law is at play. What's happened is those organizations have grown up. They probably have followed military sort of doctrine, command and control style, hierarchical design structures. And each of the individual teams have decided, we're going to build our IT and our systems, in line with what our job is to do to solve. And then another team builds theirs in their way. And so you start to create these information silos. And you get fragmented systems. These systems don't communicate with each other. You end up with unnecessary repetition of work. Good assets are get locked away in these. And that reflects in the customer experience, right? Because as a customer, you're calling up saying, hey, can you help me solve my problem? And they can solve a piece of it and then go, oh, you want that problem? Oh, no, I've got to hand you off to someone else, because their system is designed and structured around, their particular business unit and problem. And that happens over and over if you're not really deliberate about, how you organize yourself. There's some very interesting books that I've read that, I love this topic, by the way, and so it's great to be able to talk about it. But there's a couple of interesting books that, I'd highly suggest people read if you're interested in organizational design, and how it went back to early days. But there's a great book. Both of them, actually, there's probably three things. Two of them are kind of military doctrine. I'm not some kind of military historian, but one of them is a book by General Stanley McChrystal called Team of Teams. And this really talks about how the US military, when they were, in the Gulf Wars, faced an enemy who was very mobile, very unpredictable, and their traditional command and control hierarchy structures, ways of organizing themselves, couldn't keep pace with the speed that the enemy was moving. And they had to adapt, and they had to effectively create what we know in the software engineering industry as agile teams that are full stack teams that have got everyone needed to solve a problem. Well, they had to bring all parts of the military, intelligence, together, special forces, officers, generals. They had to all come together to solve a particular problem, which was, how do we keep ahead of the enemy? And so there's a really great book which sort of talks about the way they came to that. It's a good model to study because many organizations, like I said, are copies of this kind of military doctrine. And what you quickly start to realize is that, when you have uncertain problems, you have uncertain outcomes that are not predictable in a very complex kind of system. If you structure yourself in a way that's kind of command and control hierarchical, you'll never be able to adapt to meet, these unknown demands. And so our goal nowadays should be to organize ourselves to meet the next challenge that we don't even know is coming. And so how do you create an adaptable organization? So there's lots of ways to do that. The other book is Team Topologies, quite a popular one, which really talks about, software structuring teams around software engineering and the different types of team structures. So yeah, really, really good reads, both of those if you're interested in anything in that space.
And it's interesting, that book, Team Topologies, has come up, I reckon, at least 3 podcasts. So as you say, I think it's becoming a bit of a seminal work. So maybe I'll get you to talk to me a little bit about who do you think's doing this well? If we kind of had an example of, who should we be looking to for inspiration? Who do you think's doing it well, and what are they doing?
Yeah, I mean, other than REA, of course.
Of course.
But no, actually, and I will actually talk about REA because, REA is actually an organisation I've studied in the past before I joined it around, an organisation that's doing Agile well. And I know you're an ex-REA yourself, right? So how well it does it. But if I think, more globally, there's a few organisations that stand out who are organisations that traditionally you wouldn't have expected to do things like this. So, Cisco is a good example of a company who, changed the way they work. I think they've adopted the SAFe methodology of Agile, and very large global organization, facing again uncertain problems, changing markets, a move from physical networking to software networking, as we all move into the cloud. And so having to really adapt and change very, very quickly, and also deal with the communication challenges that exist across teams. They turn to the SAFe methodology and Agile to, look at how do you scale Agile. And I think this is one of the challenges. It's easy in organizations, that are relatively small to do Agile well. But when you grow really big, that's when it gets a lot more difficult. I was at ANZ Bank and we took what we call our new ways of working, where, we had thousands of individuals across both business and tech that we moved into agile ways of working. And I was the tech lead running that. And again, taking a 185-year-old bank with very traditional structures and moving them into this model, it was a real challenge. And, I wouldn't put that up as an example of doing it really well yet, because everyone's got to mature. But the fact that a large institutional organization was willing to take that risk and go, hey, we really think there's something in it, really tells you that, this is where the industry's going. A company that obviously does this very well is Atlassian. They've grown from a very small, startup effectively and are now a global juggernaut. They've picked the best out of Agile, and they kind of have their own version of it, but they, choose the ceremonies, they choose the things that allow them to work at pace and at scale, globally. And often that comes down to autonomy, right? What these companies have done is you have to make some deliberate decisions. I think you've got to decide how you want to show up to the customer. And companies that really are customer centric organize themselves in a way which allows them to deliver what customers need, the quickest and, with the best outcome. And the way you can break that down, I think, is into, describing you organize yourself as either resource efficient or you organize yourself as being flow efficient. And I'll explain what I mean by that. But, companies that are resource efficient organize themselves around the fact that you've got highly skilled, often highly paid, scarce resourced individuals, and you need to keep them 100% utilized and occupied. Think a surgeon, right? So a surgeon in a hospital, very expensive person, very highly trained. There's not a lot of them. So they basically set their timetable. Think of when you line up in a doctor's surgery, right? You're in their timetable. You queue up, you wait, you see the person you need to, and they're a specialist. But if you've got a problem that ranges across multiple specialists, geez, it's a nightmare, right? You've got to see this specialist, then you've got to book an appointment and wait 3 weeks and see another, then another 3 weeks to see another. And the whole process of fixing your problem as a customer is awful. Your customer experience is terrible, but those surgeons are all 100% utilized, right? So it's a resource efficient model for them. If you were to organize the medical profession in a way that was structured around flow efficiency, in other words, what's best for me as Chris or Shane, you would then say, okay, let's build a practice and let's have a neuro specialist, let's have a specialist who's specializes at reading x-rays and, looking at CT scans, etc. You'd have everyone needed to solve a typical customer problem all in the same team. And then you'd show up as a customer, they'd treat your case, they'd look at it, and you'd walk in and out the door in 24 hours and you'd know the answer. How awesome would that be? But, it's not optimized properly. And so the organizations that do this well, they make a deliberate decision. They say, well, what's important to us? And if the customer is important to you, then you've got to start to optimize yourself around what I call flow efficiency. And that's putting all the people you need to solve a customer's problem in one team and have those people then work collectively, collaboratively to, effectively solve that problem. And I think, REA's done that really, really well. It's an organization that's grown up very product focused, and it has organized itself into flow efficiency. There's end-to-end teams. REA's been doing Agile for a long time, and doing it very, very well. And they've got full stack end-to-end teams that build the product, they ship the product, they run production support on the products, and they really focused on the customer outcome aligned to their particular product. And that doesn't come without its challenges, like I've talked about before. And you really do have to think about, how you structure yourself to solve those. But I think those are some, I think reasonable examples of why and how you would organise yourself around that.
It's interesting. I see, as you say, I had some experience at REA, and then I've obviously experience with other organisations since. And what I tend to see is even the ones who do Agile really well still typically come up against some of those flow issues, right? When you talk about a bunch of really highly skilled teams building out microservices architecture, but coming back to that, how do I service a customer who needs multiple products? And that interesting conversation around how do I get this extra feature added to your roadmap that's going to service the thing that I need to be able to make it work end to end, and those sorts of bigger challenges as the teams get larger. And I've seen different organizations try and tackle that with, as you say, focusing on flow and value streams. Others are very traditional product focused groups and start to have that communication challenge. If you were trying to solve the problem, you've already started with, make a conscious decision to allow autonomy, starting to focus on flow. But if you were to kind of put it into a series of steps that people would be looking at in terms of priority to really change the game to solve these sorts of problems, what do you reckon they'd be?
Yeah, like I said, I think the first thing is start with the customer and work backwards from there and say, okay, what's your organizational goal and what stage of maturity are you at an organization? Because some are growing, some are more mature, delivering stable products, and then some are, in a sunset sort of phase. And knowing where you are in that, I think, can impact your organizational design a little bit. But let's assume you're an organization that is, grown and you're in a more stable phase where you're delivering regular updates, shipping product to market, and you want to continue that kind of speed and velocity, but deal with the growing pains. And I think if you're that kind of organization who has then said, yes, we want to be customer centric, you have to make those decisions and say, okay, we want to be flow optimized. However, there's always a compromise, right? There's never a perfect answer that says it's one way or another. And so as you start to optimize yourself for flow, you end up, I suppose, having to also look at an economic point of view that, flow efficiency might not appear to be a wise choice since, you've got highly paid engineers and skilled experts who aren't 100% utilized. So you then start to go, okay, well, we still want teams that are organized around value streams. And I think that's a really good idea and a good way to be organized, right? And so, if you look at the books like Team Topologies, I think they would call that a stream-aligned team, right? And so you want stream-aligned teams who are focused on a customer problem. These teams get filled with, your designers, your product owners, your engineers. Basically everyone needed to deliver that product to market. And so you definitely want that. What's happening though today is in the modern age of software engineering and software delivery, your engineers get to a point where, the cognitive load on an engineer today is extreme. I don't know when the last time you've sat down and cut code, Shane, but, when you do it, the amount of things you have to learn nowadays to be effective, you've got to learn the language, of course, JavaScript, Python, Ruby, Go, Swift, whatever. You've then got to probably understand containers and Docker. You've got to understand cloud platforms like AWS and GCP. You've got to understand, data structures and algorithms. You've got to be a Git expert. You've got to know your IDE, be that Visual Studio, or if you're hardcore, Linux guy, VI. You've got to know a scripting tool like Bash and Linux. You've got to know multiple database tech, Mongo, Redis, MySQL, basic networking, APIs, the list goes on, right? And so the cognitive load in these teams is extreme and gets to a point where you go, you know what, they can't actually do it all. So then what you actually have to do is go, okay, we definitely want stream-aligned teams, but how do we take some of the load off those? And so then you start to create, what I'd call enabling teams, right? Which again is related to team topologies. And I think that's why it's got so much traction, because it really describes or puts into terms what a lot of companies are already doing. So what we're at REA are doing. And these are teams where you go, you know what, we can't have the product teams doing everything. They shouldn't have to worry about running, Amazon cloud services. They shouldn't worry about, test automation frameworks. So we create some teams that build enabling capabilities. And so we've got those at REA. We've got these enabling teams who, handle things like shipping product to production, and they actually build a product. Our product's called Shipper. So they build that as a product that other people use, and therefore they can take that load off the engineering teams. You then also, they have to go, there are going to be those skilled resources, the equivalent of a surgeon, in your team where you just don't have enough of them and they can't scale. And, examples like that would be things like data scientists or cybersecurity experts. And what you then want to do with those type of people is go, okay, they need to almost be able to roam and sit with the teams that need it. Not every single team within your organization is going to have a cybersecurity expert embedded in, but you might have one per tribe, or you might have, a different structure, but you're allocating these scarce resources across these teams for them to then allocate and prioritize as they choose. And I think that's the important bit always. Autonomy. You want the teams to maintain autonomy to keep speed up and to keep quality up. So let them choose how to deploy those scarce resources. The final step I'd say is create platform capability teams. So underpinning all of the teams that are shipping product to market are teams that are building common reusable things. We've got this great terminology at REA, where effectively we nurture the butterflies and we kill the zombies, is the way we describe it. And the butterflies are the great reusable things across the organization. When we find something that a lot of developers and engineers need to do over and over, we build it as a product, we build it as a platform. And we've created this thing called Colab, which is full of these products that are treated like products. They have product owners, they've got engineers, they've got developers, but their customers are our own engineering teams. And so you need to create these platform teams, and they build things like, we got one called Copilot that deploys all of our cloud infrastructure and networking and security at the push of a button. We've got teams like Lock who deal with our security sign-on, so other people don't have to reinvent that problem and solve it over and over again. So it's a combination of those things, I think, that really, if you methodically go, okay, we're customer centric, we want to be flow efficient, we want to organize in, product or streamlined teams, what do I need then to make that successful? Well, like I said, you need platform teams, you're going to need enabling teams, and you're going to need experts that are distributed amongst those teams to allow it to grow. And then you're going to have a mindset that you're not going to get it right, and that you've got to continually optimize. So assuming you can sort of set and forget is a really bad mistake. So just assume that whatever you put in place, in 3, 4, 5 months' time as the organization changes, will need to change as well. And so if you're open to that continual change and optimization, I think you can really get a great outcome in your organizational design.
And mate, I was going to dig a bit further on that one and try and tease out of you a war story of when it didn't quite work, but we're up on time. So I'll save you the airing of dirty laundry, mate. I really appreciate you joining us. And thanks for a bit of insight into what you're up to at REA. But to that end, what is next for you at REA?
So for us at REA, next, we're looking at a number of things. One, like I said, continuing to optimize how we're organized. So that's an ongoing thing that, as we grow and mature, as we acquire other businesses, we're moving into the financial services space. We acquired Smartline, and then we recently acquired Mortgage Choice, for example. So we're now the second largest financial broking business in the country. And that requires, some different capabilities, different organizational skills, more regulatory compliance overview. So, we got to continue to optimize how we organize, what skills, what people do we need in the organization, and how do we organize around what's best for the customer. So that's ongoing. We're focusing heavy on data. We're a data driven business, so we're really looking at data streaming, event driven architectures, and of course machine learning. So a lot of focus on machine learning, optimizing the best use of the data so that we can give the best products to our consumers and our customers, but also building an ML ops capability to deliver and democratize machine learning getting out into the teams where they need it. And again, that comes back to that. If you want autonomy and speed, you've got to make it easy for the teams to effectively leverage those capabilities. So, building ML ops pipelines means your data scientists can, deploy machine learning models very quickly without having to deal with all the, the pain and frustration that goes with setting those environments up. The next focus for me is on our workforce. We know there's a talent shortage. We know with COVID and the lack of immigration that locally in Australia, we have a shortage of top IT talent. So I'm focusing a lot on growing talent, our graduate programs. How do we build capability within the organization or bring in new talent and grow that talent? And I think finally, continuing to scale our platform strategy. We've got some great platforms, but we do think as the organization grows, we can get even more value from those platforms. So I'm continuing to work on, how do we grow and scale our whole platform strategy within REA.
Mate, sounds like you've just got a couple of things on your plate. I'll leave you to it. Thanks very much for your time, and we'll chat again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. Thanks for having me on.
You've been listening to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams. To find out about how Shane enables digital businesses to scale, please visit shanewilliams.com.au. Thank you for listening.